MSR, is it? Yeah.
Good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be, for our American viewers. This is episode 7 of the Magnum Opi Podcast, and today we're going to be looking at Animal Farm. I would usually pass to everyone to give a brief summary, and that usually lands on the lap of Freelance, but he's not with us currently. So who wants to step up and give a basic overview of Animal Farm?
I guess I will.
Yep, take the stand.
Okay. Animal Farm is an allegory of the Russian Revolution, which takes the form of a kind of beast fable, only without a direct moral at the end. The animals stage a revolution against their farmer. They overthrow him, and then they try to operate the farm on their own. And various disasters befall them. Their original songs and their commandments that they have written out are kind of corroded and eaten away, and we see a kind of distortion of the truth on a grand scale. So these basically correspond to each type of animal basically corresponds to either a section of society, or sometimes there'll be like someone will personify a whole class, or a country, an adjacent country. Even I think the human beings who are ejected seem to personify countries like Germany, England, and so on.
Yes, and how does everyone feel after reading Catch-22 about having gone from that to Animal Farm? I think it was a bit of a breath of fresh air for lots of people.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Definitely.
My question is George Orwell really a leftist?
He suggested that he was on many occasions. I guess that the argument is the guys in the organization are the ones that know the problems, so they're more apt to be able to point them out. That doesn't necessarily discount their adherence or wanting to join that organization.
I think one of the main differences between Orwell as a socialist and other socialists is he had a genuine admiration for the working class, as opposed to just a disgust at the upper class.
Well, he certainly struck me as an idealist, which I guess is the same thing.
I think regardless of his stance, his analysis is always spot on. And he, from what I've read, he doesn't often provide his own solution. So you don't even need to read it on the basis that that you may disagree with what he would provide as a solution, because for the majority of his writing, he just writes about this is the current state of affairs, and this is the analysis of what is going wrong. So I've never read something of his where he at least doesn't get the problem correct. On the occasions that he has given his own solution, there's sometimes disagreements there, obviously. But I think, as you say, Brandig, when you're in a system, you are the best person to critique it, because you know it, the nuts and bolts of it. And for anyone that's watching that isn't aware, he worked for, I think, 2 years or 3 years at the BBC. So he was when he's writing books like 1984 and Animal Farm, where a large theme is propaganda machines. He was in the center of the world's biggest propaganda machine at the time.
Unfortunately, somehow the BBC managed to burn all traces of his work while at the BBC, supposedly by accident.
Oh, really? Interesting. He also wrote Homage to Catalonia, which is one of the sort of autobiographical account of his fighting in the Spanish Civil War on the wrong side. I mean, whoops, the leftist side. But once again, he provides the analysis of the left, the critique of the left, which is, I mean, his critique of them was that there was too much infighting, is what it came down to, right? But to me seems like somebody who had a lot of second thoughts, but then he never ever said, right, I think I might just be a reactionary after all.
Well, I think a big issue as well is that he still felt that there could be a delineation between socialism and communism, and he was ardently against any form of communism and criticized it, regardless of who implemented it, which we'll see with Animal Farm. But he did feel that that socialism could be achieved without it moving on to that next step.
I think it was more for like a segment of socialism that he was more against. Like in Road to Wigan Pier, he describes them as sandal-wearing, cider-drinking socialists.
Yeah, it's the champagne socialists. It's the intellectual class that he criticizes most, I think. And
I think I prefer sandal-wearing, cider-drinking. Yeah.
Well, maybe I take offense to cider drinking being from the south. But yes, yeah, I think that again, he was surrounded by these types of people, so he really knew he knew exactly who he was criticizing. And I think as we go through the book, we'll see exactly who represents that in Animal Farm. So did everyone like it?
I loved it.
This for me is contentious with it's in contention with Lord of the Flies as being the best that we've read so far, I think.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I like the fact that we have another pig another pig skull that's being worshipped.
Yeah, maybe I've just got this weird, I don't know, maybe there's a Freudian obsession with pig skulls that I have, but both of my favorite books that we've done so far both involve them.
The worship of pig skulls.
I don't know what that reveals about me. But right, let's move on to the author, as we've just been speaking about him. Nope, there's some beeping somewhere. Okay. So, as we've been discussing him already, I've put his quote. That isn't. Let me just reread and remember. They have a statue in the BBC of George Orwell, and I'm trying to remember which quote it is that they use behind him. But there is a certain irony about it. I think the quote that they use there is it's something to the effect of, "You don't have freedom of speech if you're not allowed to tell people what they don't want to hear."
Right.
Yeah, which being in the headquarters of the BBC now is, well, you'd imagine that they would read that, but evidently not. So, obviously, carry on.
Politics of the English language. I mean, so many of his works are so apropos of the left, not just then, but of the left of today. And I think that Orwell's getting less and less popular with them.
Yes, and he has a preface to Animal Farm, which I want at some stage for us to take a look at on a separate occasion, because he really hits the nail on the head of not just any sort of left-right divide, but he really goes into detail as into the concept that we now have of the cathedral. He's expressing it in ways that we don't really see in any other writing until 40 years later. He really knows exactly what's happening when it comes to systems of politics, regardless of their political orientation, but the actual system themselves and the formalization of those systems. That preface is fantastic at explaining some of that, and particularly with the concept of the cathedral, he does a lot of explanation of how there's a lot of decentralization in some of the systems that are both private and government, where they don't necessarily have to be direct links to each other, but they still work in tandem to help each other. So the preface is fantastic, and so we definitely should cover that at some stage. But it wasn't actually released, and I think it was only uncovered in the 70s. That he had typed this up, and it was released in I think the Ukrainian edition or some bizarre edition that you wouldn't expect it to be. But to my knowledge, it's never been released in the English edition. So, any comments that people want to make about Orwell? We've gone into him quite a lot already, but any trivia that people have? I've got a couple of notes that I want to go into. I think he's most famous for 1984, obviously, but I would put Animal Farm up there as being just as informative.
I would put Animal Farm ahead of 1984 myself.
Yeah.
It's so succinct, isn't it? I read Down and Out in London and Paris. I'm trying to. There's a lot of sort of abject. I think that's Orwell really getting down and dirty with the working class, right?
Yeah, well, the same with Road to Wigan Pier. Like the whole thing's about him staying in this B&B essentially, and
one I haven't read.
Meeting with the miners.
I think I can't remember which one it was in. It was in research that he was doing it for, but he intentionally got himself arrested at one stage as well to try and put himself in with a group of inebriates. He got arrested for drunken disorderly conduct to try and go in and talk to the working class that were in prison at the time. So
almost
he's
a method writer.
Yes, exactly. He's someone that again he saw the problems that you had with these cider drinking socialists, where they were fighting on behalf of a people that they found repugnant. But he was willing to actually go in and get his hands dirty and see what the working class of Britain were like at the time. And I think that is one of the things that really differentiates him.
But back then, the left still had hope that they could convert the working class to their way of thinking. And now they've given up on that, right? And now they just hate them openly.
Well, I don't know that I wouldn't go that far.
Well, I think it's the whole whiteness thing, right? Like they've decided that the white working class are just, hateable because you can dismiss them because they're white, right?
This tickles on a little bit of the themes of Animal Farm, but the entire direction of socialists, communists, collectivists, etc., is they have to other the perceived majority or those perceived in power so that they can aggregate the excluded.
Mm-hmm.
And without a boogeyman against whom they can rally, they have no power. So consequently, they have to find a boogeyman, but they have to find a boogeyman that has no power of its own.
Yeah, and isn't really provable.
Right, they can't fight back against it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same in 1984, isn't it? It's, you just replace, what's he called in 1984?
Something Stein.
Yes, yeah.
It's not gold.
Something Jewish.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly. The 2 minutes of hate.
With Snowball. Yeah.
Emmanuel Goldstein, I think.
It is Goldstein.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's just this kind of course, I'm not going to speak for every single, member of the left, but there is this kind of disgust with, I noticed this particularly in the States where people talk about white trash, right? And they're happily talking about white trash as the only group that they're allowed to talk about like that,
Mm-hmm. And the people from the South as well, just generally, I think.
Yeah, especially.
Well, those two are aggregated together as
Southern white trash, the most contemptible people.
Acceptable enemies.
Yeah. If we're getting onto this now, I think that to touch on where Orwell's coming from, on his perspective, he sees someone like Boxer as being the true representation of what the proletariat should be and what socialism should be fighting for.
Yeah. Well,
and then you have the pigs being
he describes Boxer in much the same way as he describes the miners in Road to Wigan Pier. He describes them very similar.
Yeah, there's a certain admiration that he has of the down and outs, which the left of this time from that side, that sphere, I can be sympathetic towards. I think it was more common in the north of England that you had this sort of real, actual working class socialism. It's probably a bit of a southern intervention that saw the cider drinking sandal wearers, take over. But have
you ever seen Pigs in May? Is it? It's the
what's it called? Something in Nuts in May.
Nuts in May, yeah. It's about a pig. Yeah. Nuts in May, and just like the guy in that, Keith. That to me sort of is that's what comes to mind when I think this type of
Such a perfect name as well.
Keith.
Right. So just whilst we're on bouncing back and forth, I know that it's been a little bit sporadic on some of the ideas so far, but it's been a good conversation. One of the things I did want to bring up with Orwell is a couple of the footnotes that I found about him discussing Animal Farm. One of them was a friend asking him whether or not the book was just to criticize the Soviet regime, or whether or not it was used in general to criticize revolution. And the quote that I have here, I think really encapsulates it very well from Orwell, is violent conspiratorial revolution led by unconsciously power-hungry people will only lead to a change in masters. Mm-hmm. So, although he is a bit of an idealist, he does have this very cynical view of power. And I think that's why he was so good at deconstructing a lot of the socialist establishments.
Well, it made me think of some of the videos that have been made recently about the English Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
and the connection, with the kind of links you can draw from Animal Farm to that as well. Just like one master replacing another, and how people weren't necessarily better off afterwards. You
mean?
Yeah, and it makes me think. Oh, sorry, carry on, Justin.
You mean under Cromwell?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, or just generally moving forwards.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a lot of Southern American revolutions as well, where you see just this change of hands and nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, although obviously it is specifically based on characters involved in the Soviet Union, it can be used as an example for any kind of violent revolution where, as he says, unconsciously power-hungry people are just using it as an opportunity to take the reins of power.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it's unconscious.
Well, yeah, that's a contentious point. That's a very good point that you mentioned. I think that I don't know why he used unconsciously. I don't know.
Trying to be
I don't know how much I buy it. I think he might just be charitable.
Well, if someone wants power, they want power. There's nothing unconscious about it. I mean,
that's Orwell's perspective, though. He's someone who doesn't recognize the unconscious desire for power within himself. So he attributes similar motives to people that are not necessarily present. So he being an idealist, a communist socialist idealist, would theoretically want, the idea of power, but power to empower rather than power to control. And he doesn't recognize that anytime anyone, be they idealist or not, aggregates power, those who covet power are going to be attracted to that which they're aggregating.
I mean, unlike most people in general, not just socialists or whoever they may be, Orwell does put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. He actually went to fight the fascists in Spain, or he actually puts himself in situations to get an idea of what people go through. Whereas most of the people that he's railing against in terms of the socialists, it's their hatred of the rich as opposed to his genuine compassion for the working class.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that with people. There's a lot of envy of the rich that underlies some people's leftism.
Yeah, well, I've seen because my wife, she's into anti-fox hunting groups, and I tried to point out to her there's a lot of people in these groups that don't give a damn about the foxes. Mm-hmm. It's literally just these toffs. They hate the people doing it. They don't care about the animals.
They want to knock them off their perch, right? Knock them off their hook.
Yeah, it's just these are toffs. Let's go and cause some trouble, kind of thing. And that's the impression I got. You just need to read any comment section of any video about anti-fox hunting, and the majority seems to be that kind of person.
Yeah.
Yes. Now let's move on to some of the influences for the book. Obviously, in the middle, someone we've already covered. We've got Aldous Huxley. I think we discussed on the Brave New World stream that they met in college. Was it Eton? I'm not quite sure, but Huxley taught Orwell French, I believe, and they exchanged letters back and forth for a number of years after that. So he was certainly inspired by Huxley. On the left, we have Gulliver's Travels, which is something that we'll be looking at in a few months. It is another satire. I mean, Swift is known for his satires, and it's a little bit more childish. It's a little bit less dark humor in Gulliver's Travel, but you can certainly see some similarities. And there's also anthropomorphic horses in Gulliver's Travel, so I don't know if there's some kind of animal connection there as well. The one on the right, I could find very little information about. It's called White Acre versus Black Acre, and it's apparently was very influential for Orwell when writing this. It's a plantation novel, which is also allegorical, that was written in response to the Uncle Tom. Was it Uncle Tom's Cabin? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was written in response to that as a way of giving a more positive perspective on a slave group that found the abolitionists to be troublesome. So it wasn't exactly pro slavery, but it was more. It was less revolutionary. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, which who knows what a good source that is on these subjects. Orwell found it a great inspiration when writing this, but I could find very little about it.
That goes back to the whole question of theory versus practice and idealism versus actualization, which is core to the meaning and the message Orwell was intending to send with Animal Farm specifically.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
So the trouble with abolitionists is they believe in the they believe in the abstract and the theory and the ideal, and then they don't actually focus on the practical implications of what happens if that attempts to get implemented. There's no understanding of the consequences of their desire. There's no connection between what's naturally going to follow when they push the rock down the hill.
Yeah, if the goal's worth it, then be damned anything that gets in its way.
It's tear down the system, and we'll think about the consequences afterwards.
Right, and the problem is self-selection bias. The people who want to tear down systems are the ones who are attracted to people who are saying we want to tear down the system, and they jump on board that for the tearing down part, but they jump off when it comes time to manufacture the next system.
So
it's like they would destroy the 95% to get to the last 5.
This sounds like an interesting book. Was this fellow critical of the efforts to?
Yes, from the very small amounts of information I could find about it, I did wonder whether or not it might be worth looking at some stage. He seemed to be pretty even-handed with it, where it was, as I say, a discussion of abolitionism, where the slaves weren't pro-slavery, but they were just anti the abolitionist movement. I may be completely incorrect about this. This is just me trying to find synopsis on a book that's not anywhere being discussed. So I might be off on that. But from what I could see on the synopsis that I found, it was more of a discussion of revolution in general, using plantation as a setting. And I think that's, as you can see, that would be why he found it an inspiration for the book.
Yeah. It's an interesting. You can imagine abolitionism attracted all sorts of virtue signalers, right? Who just wanted to be right and not necessarily think about the practicalities.
Yes, and let's put a pin on that subject and move on. So, the legacy left behind by Animal Farm. It has 2 films, and I've not seen either of them. I think a couple of the people on the panel have. Has anyone seen the original, the 1954 film?
Is that the one on the
Yeah,
left?
animated. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So-
in fact, Quack, someone was it you, Quackhouse, who put that up on the chat?
It was
Yes,
well,
yeah. It's I rewatched it for this.
So I was very interested to find out that it is quite literally a CIA psyop. It was
Yeah,
it was entirely funded by CIA shell companies, and let me find his name.
It kind of makes sense of some of the small changes that they made, or not so small.
Howard Hunt, confirmed that he was sent to talk to Orwell's widow to get the rights to make the film, and it was entirely funded by them, and they intentionally altered the ending to suit their needs, which we could discuss what that might be, because I believe the ending...
It's not that much different.
It's significantly different.
The very end is different from what I understand.
The very end.
It's hugely different. It's like orders of magnitude different. It conveys an entirely different conclusion to the book.
Before we will talk about that, but I just want to say, anyone that's listening, go read the book. It's only 100 pages long. You have no excuse to watch this without having read the book first. But the ending of the book is fairly bleak, and there is no change. It's just a review of the system that is now in place. Whereas the ending of the 1954 film, I believe, is a revolution led by Benjamin, the donkey, and they managed to over.
Well, like an American Revolution.
Is it?
That's the
is it Benjamin?
implication.
Yeah. So it's a counter revolution is led, and they managed to overthrow Napoleon and the system currently in place.
I must have missed something if that's the version I watched, because that's not what I remember.
Similarly, though I don't have evidence as to why this was changed, the 1999 live action version also had a very different ending, because the ending of the film has a new family move onto the farm and work alongside the animals to build up an actual utopia. So I don't know if the angle they were going for there in 1999 was that the benevolent outsider has come in to solve all their problems, but maybe I'm reading too far into that. But given the fact that the first one was intentional propaganda, I question the ending of the more recent one.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if that was another allegory toward the public-private partnership between the Western Anglosphere and China as a manufacturing center, because the 90s was when a lot of that started in earnest.
Yes. Aside from that, on the legacy that's left behind, probably most famously is the term "all animals are equal," but some animals are more equal than others. That is used in common parlance quite a lot. A lot of people probably use it without even realizing what it's in reference to. Orwell's very, very good at writing succinctly, and very good at having these aphorisms just dotted around, where you can see why they're being pulled out and used day to day, because they're so on the money.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, all of those are so cleverly written, and just explain so many ideas in just one sentence.
Sheep, it's always the sheep 4 legs.
The other couple of interesting bits I found out: the CIA again. I should probably come up with some kind of code word for that, because if I say that too many times, the stream's going to get shut down. The agency in the 50s sent millions of balloons carrying copies of the book over Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. And they sent them on balloons so that the Air Force shot them down, and everyone that was in the country, if they saw these books falling out the sky, would go and read them. So they did it as to try and stir up rebellion, as a way of showing how totalitarian the systems of government were. the thing that I found funny is that the information immediately following that is that in the 60s there were multiple states that tried to ban Animal Farm from being on the reading lists of school because they found it too counterculturally inspiring. So yes,
I wonder. I would love to hear, the story of somebody who found a copy of Animal Farm and translated into Czech, and what they made of it. It'd be hilarious.
Yeah, I can't imagine those sort of ops doing anything. But maybe I'm wrong. I can't imagine being a Czech, civilian just walking around and seeing a book fall out of the sky, and that being the reason that I lead a revolution.
They forget to translate it out of English.
Yeah, well, no, I think the more the idea is, you give it to the children young, plant the seed. That's it. It's not about subverting the adults.
Yeah, and that's probably why they're trying to get it out of so many schools now. But the final thing I just wanted to mention is the difficulty that he had in getting it published. He went to multiple publishers, and after being told by the Ministry of Information not to publish it, he was rejected repeatedly. He also had an American publisher reject it because the subtitle of the book is a fairy story. And the publisher obviously didn't read it and said, we don't want to publish another children's book because they're not selling. So, don't read it. Right.
I like the subtitle. I was sort of mulling it over.
Well, it's a classic fairy story, not like the fairy tale story. Well, the original, the Brothers Grimm or other similar Aesop's Fables type fairy stories, wherein the moral is harsh and stark, and presented as absolute with clear, significant consequences for those transgressors.
I do think the difference that you find in this compared to classic fairy tales of the sort that you describe is that they typically end on a very obvious moral point, whereas the ending is a little bit more, you should have learned your lesson up until this point, but there isn't a final nail in the coffin for hammering home the moral of the story.
The line that you mentioned, that Orwell said when he was asked whether this applied to other revolutions apart from the Russian Revolution, what you said about, I think that is the moral of the story, isn't it? About.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is the moral of the story, but I think that I don't know, take something like Cinderella, any of those kind of Cinderella or Snow White or any of those kind of stories, there's usually a finalized death to show the moral of the story. It's quite a finite point, whereas this is left on a bit of the system is still in place, and currently there's no evidence of it changing. So it's not quite as finalized.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the moral for me would be just power corrupts. And that would be it, really. And absolute power corrupts absolute.
Don't trust pigs.
Don't trust pigs bearing gifts.
Right, so let's move on to the text analysis. So as we've discussed, all of this is going to be viewed from the lens that he was writing an allegory about the Russian Revolution. So we will look at the characters as we typically do. I couldn't find any live action picture of Mr. Jones, so I've just stuck on a happy farmer there. So, Mr. Jones, who wants to explain their thoughts on Mr. Jones?
He's lazy. He's bad-tempered. He's, I don't know, mean. He's just everything negative you could possibly say about a person, really.
He's also a terrible farmer.
Well, yeah. I mean, the lazy part would kind of allude to that, wouldn't it?
I think he's an alcoholic as well.
Yeah.
There's a telling line where they have their revolutionary ideas, but they don't think the rebellion is going to come, anytime soon. But then things just fall apart thanks to Mr. Jones, kind of thing. And that obviously
it's his own ineptitude, isn't it, that causes the whole thing to unfold.
Yeah.
I'm glad
It
you
speeds
mentioned
up
that
the
line.
process.
Yeah, it's a very interesting little part that he adds in where he says that, well, to give the basic beginning, old Major, who we'll touch on in a moment, is the pig that provides the concept of animalism, which obviously is communism, and all of the animals are under the knowledge that a revolution is going to come, but they don't have any kind of time frame of when it's going to happen. It could be next week, it could be in 100 years' time, is how it's explained. But there's a line in the book that says it happened far quicker than anyone expected. And I do wonder what that was in reference to, whether or not it was referring to the mistreatment that Mr. Jones dished out on the animals, or if we're putting it in the Russian Revolution context, if there was some strings being pulled that maybe advanced it quicker than were to be expected.
Or maybe it's kind of just a reference to the maybe ineptitude of the Tsar at that time, and that's how he's generally kind of seen. During World War I believe he's considered to have kind of mismanaged things quite dramatically.
Yes. Carry on, Brandon.
I was just going to say that the precipitating event is the culmination of what the current administration is doing poorly. And the faster or worse they manage to do that, the more likely it is to precipitate a situation that would allow for revolution. So one of the recurring themes of this is the revolutionary mindset only finds fertile soil in the oppressed and the underclasses and those who are exploited. So systems that exacerbate those problems within their populace are the ones that are most rife for such revolution. And that's where Major and the other animals were finding their greatest adherents. Specifically, Mr. Jones being the inept, dictatorial, authoritarian, abusive government is a fundamental necessary precursor to such a revolution.
Yes, I think it also speaks to the frailty of the system that's currently in place, that they've never pushed up against it, but when they finally just have a little bit of resistance, all of the farmers flee in terror because they've never experienced any kind of pushback. So I do think
that's the psychological
system.
Yeah, that's the psychological corollary of power trips. Those who want power because they've never had it, and they guard it covetously because they have no real capacity to achieve it in any other way other than through dictatorial fiat. You don't need to worry about the strong man if he takes power. You have to worry about the weak man who takes power, because the weak man has never had power and doesn't understand the consequences of use of power, whereas the strong man has had power all his life and he understands the concept of restraint.
Yeah, well, you get that in stories all the time, don't you? You know, even something like Game of Thrones, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the understanding of the consequences of one's exercise of power was, throughout history, one of the core lessons that were inculcated in future generations of good rulers. Good rulers knew when to exercise power and when to restrain power. Whereas Mr. Jones, as is shown throughout the book, especially in the first couple chapters, exercises capricious and arbitrary authority when he feels challenged and threatened, because if he fails to do so, the complete and total lack of power he has is going to be laid bare for all to see.
So this is my challenge that I have to a comment that was made by Quackhouse earlier. Is it a Lord Acton quote? I think the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mm-hmm. And funnily enough, I was reading, as I've mentioned to you previously, I was reading Excuse Me, Professor, and one of those essays was about if only the right people were in charge. I understand the cynical view of if a system is in place, regardless of who is involved in that system, it has, depending on the incentives laid out in that system, they're going to change their behavior to suit that system. I understand that, but I do think I do still think that the absolute the power corruption, it does still depend on who's leading. And I don't think that you'd have a revolution like this if you have someone that, regardless of if the exact same power structure was the same, you had a more dignified leader.
Well, the challenge comes in that leader may be fine, but what about the next generation and the next generation and the next generation? Once society adapts to the use of power, there's less and less need to exercise that power or exercise that authority. And a leader who doesn't exercise their power is going to be thought weak, because that's just the nature of things. Children test their parents all the time to see what they can and cannot get away with. In fact, humans do that constantly to see whether what they believe to be the rules are in fact the rules. So as a consequence of that, you're going to see greater and greater pushback for lesser and lesser transgressions as time goes on, because nowadays people recognize arbitrary murder and wanton slaughter and wholesale rampaging and sacking of cities is wrong. So while those crimes have gone the way of the dodo,
and yet
nowadays we're talking about
I agree.
microaggressions.
The power of a system only comes about when it's actually enforced. So what I'm saying is that I think it's two pronged, but I think it's easy for the more what's the soul term, the more constrained division to just view it as a systematic problem. But my point is that I think that bad systems corrupt good leaders, but bad leaders corrupt good systems. I think it works both ways, and I think that it's. I think that on either side, it can be taken too far to one extreme. The thought process.
The system. I'm just thinking, like the system, like a monarchy, should be, I don't know, strong enough to withstand a bad leader. You know, it should be.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the best that you can get is a good system with a good leader. But what I'm saying is that if either one of those falters, it should be strong enough for the other to uphold it, at least temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that the best system would be too susceptible, or the system that would be best for the people would be too susceptible to bad people. So you've got to have some kind of compromise.
It's kind of interesting to look at the Russian example, because it didn't conform to Marx's predictions in that they didn't really go through a capitalist phase, right? And another thing was that, we often think of the two players as being the Tsar on the one hand and the Bolsheviks on the other, but there's actually a large group of sort of, I guess we call them like liberal parliamentarian types, of which Vladimir Nabokov's family was one. They wanted to, have like the Tsar, but also like something more similar to the British system, I guess.
The same kind of thing happened in like Ethiopia as well. They got rid of a king and they essentially just took over all the terrible practices and in fact made them 10 times worse and turned the country what it is into Haile what it is today.
Right? Did they get rid of Haile Selassie?
Yeah, and they basically just took over the institutions that he'd left in place, and in fact made them, even more, oppressive and extractive.
Yeah.
And they were socialists.
Yeah, it was brutal. It's a horrible alternative. So
for a character that has very few lines or mentions in the book, I think we managed to get quite a good discussion out of him.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to. Is anyone particularly familiar with the Russian Revolution? Because I know bits and pieces, but throughout I do want to try and tie the actions in the book to what happened
Yeah,
during the revolution.
I know something about it.
Because I think from what I understand, the initial revolt that they have is the 1917 revolution.
Yeah.
Then the Battle of the Cowshed is the 1918 solidification of the Bolshevik power. Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Then
so
we
let's
went through 10 years or so of like a very revolutionary sort of, period where Lenin was very active, and then the struggle between Lenin and Trotsky.
let's get Lenin up
in the book. Yeah. Well, excellent.
I like the way, I just want to say the pigs all have their real names, and then they've got the names they're known by, like Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky.
Right, yeah.
I think that this one in particular, he's a combination of Lenin and Marx, because he's the dreamer. He's the person that provides the animals with the concept of animalism. But there's obviously this passing down of the torch from Old Major to Snowball and Napoleon that sees him take the role of Lenin as well.
I'd say one of the big differences that Old Major kind of thought it was just somewhere down the line, like quite a long way, or just like maybe even a pipe dream, whereas Marx in reality actually thought that they were on the cusp of it happening, communism.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say that Old Major's probably more idealistic, he's less mean-spiritedly idealistic than someone like Marx, but maybe I'm being harsh on him. I think there's a striking similarity between Marx and the actual pig use, but maybe that's just me.
Similar.
When did he die in the book? I can't remember what point it was. Was it before
3
the
days?
revolution?
Yeah, so he dies before the revolution. I think 3 days after he makes his announcements. So that would sort of see him fulfill more the role of Marx. But one of the big hints that he has the position of Lenin as well is that they take out his skull and that everyone has to go past it as a sign of respect. And obviously, Lenin was embalmed, and his body was kind of used as a strong marker of showing respect to the regime.
But the pigs do eventually ban it, don't they?
Yes, which I don't know what
matching up.
I don't know. I'm assuming that happened with Lenin's body. I would imagine after a certain period of time, Stalin took away Lenin's body as a symbolic gesture, because he wouldn't want anyone being above him. But I might be wrong about that.
I mean, you kind of think the idea of communism, like you wouldn't want one single person to be, lauded at all. And
yes, but don't you see that they have to be lauded because they have to be the people that do all of the hard work?
But once you've had,
it's not like he wants it. He doesn't want to be in charge. He has to.
Yeah.
He very graciously took that position.
The extra food and the beds are just the thing they have to put up with in order to do all the extra thinking, the extra brain work.
Those
all
milk and
milk
apples.
Those apples,
Yeah.
The ribbons that some people like.
Yes.
Well, the point made by Orwell again, I think, in the same conversation that he had with his friend discussing whether or not it was just in reference to the Soviet Revolution, he mentioned. Sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. It
happens.
Just remind me where we were on. I just looked at
Old Major Revolution.
God, that's not a good sign.
Really walking around the school.
Yeah, him being kind of Marx and Lenin.
While giving you a second to
walking around the school with Lenin.
You carry on. I just while
giving you a second to think, Albion, I would just suggest that Old Major is really much more allegorical towards Marx, in that he's the one that first articulates and identifies the animalism which is a very soft, hard proxy for communism and socialism. And he also never sees the actual culmination of his work.
It's only his skull that's Lenin.
Yeah, it's very few. I have remembered where I am now. Sorry, I just said
well, we better keep interrupting you then.
Early onset dementia. I don't know what kicked in then. My brain just went completely blank. No, all I was going to mention is whilst we're talking about the milk and apples, the disappearance of the milk, which is the very first sign that the pigs are starting to not
Take
embrace
liberty.
not embrace the full ideas of animalism. The conversation that Orwell was having with his friend was that if this was to be a truly successful socialist revolution, it should have been at that point that all of the other animals turned around and slaughtered the pigs. That as soon as there was corruption seen before a new system was established, they needed to get rid of it straight away.
At the same time, had they slaughtered the pigs, then they would have probably all died right away, because I don't think any of the animals were smart enough to run the system that they need.
No.
This is the eternal issue with intellectuals.
Yeah,
they're needed, but they know they're needed.
But then, in the Russian sense, it was the thing that messed them up was getting rid of the not like the top level, like, but the actual farmers, wasn't it? You know, it's killing the people that know how to make the things. Whereas in animal farm, it would be the equivalent to killing, you know, not the pigs, but the other animals. Just leaving the pigs. Or just leaving the pigs and the chickens, you know, killing everyone in the middle.
Well, the fundamental problem with the Russian Revolution wasn't so much that they killed the farmers, it's they killed subject matter experts who are articulating elements about which they were subject matter experts to people who had no understanding of what was going on, but were theoretical experts.
Yeah, whether they be farmers or coal miners.
Exactly.
Or, you know, whatever it was,
There was
just replace them with bureaucrats.
There was the whole matter of the kulaks as well, who were actually good at raising food.
Do you think anyone in the animal farm is meant to be a representation of the kulaks, or is this too early? It was written in 1945. When was the when was that period where they slaughtered the kulaks?
I think it was earlier. I don't know. I have to look it up.
Because I had that in my mind whilst reading it, and I couldn't think of anyone that fit properly that description.
I would presume it was after the slaughter of the kulaks.
I mean, do you think Orwell's, one of his comments is that the communism would eventually just turn into capitalism, like the farm basically did, or like some kind of dictatorship capitalism? I mean, I don't know whether the farm at the end is really capitalism. It's more a dictatorship, I guess. But it is.
It's very much a dictatorship.
It's more like China than it is like, Venezuela or something.
And they've forgotten what it was like even before the revolution, and they just assume it must be worse. But I wanted to mention the incident where the milk goes missing is the first time I really noticed the use of the passive voice. It was noticed that the milk had disappeared type thing, which is, I think, Orwell doing that on purpose to show, when we want to hide something, that we use the passive voice to hide the actor, right?
Yes, and I think he does that throughout in reference to the changing of the 7 commandments as well.
Mm-hmm. It was remarked that they had changed.
So let's move on to Napoleon. Where to start?
That's one dignified-looking pig.
Yeah, quite a base pig. If I had him as a leader, I don't know. Maybe I could get away with some of it.
It's like one of those paintings you can get done at the minute. Of your animal. You get your pet's head put on some kind of old-timey portrait.
I'm not certain I like his look.
No, I like his. You mean the expression on his face?
Untrustworthy eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
Weak chin.
Yeah, slight frown of disgust.
I like that. But Stalin does look more serene in this picture. I remember in Chinatown they used to sell these pictures of Stalin, Marx, and Lenin before these regimes fell, and you could just pick these things up for a song.
Yes, and I think in quite a few, I think it's Taiwan that I'm thinking of in particular. The swastika is used as a symbol of like free-spirited, like masculine authority. Like they have no real connection with the.
Is it meant to be like because I know it's an ancient symbol, right? Is it meant to be
inverted? It is an Indian symbol that I think is a. I don't know if it's masculine or feminine.
It represents eternity or something like that.
Yeah. It's something to do with eternal life, if from memory.
I think in Japan it's essentially used in texts and things like it's like an exclamation point almost.
So I just want to say you were talking about the kulaks a minute ago, and I was just doing some cursory googling, and some people seem to be saying it's the chickens who destroy their own eggs.
Yeah, so I put down more generally as just productive workers that were actually being subjugated to having their goods being taken off them and finally realizing the consequences of the system. It could well be the kulaks
destroying their own goods, don't they? And then half of them die. Something like that.
Yeah.
Chickens, yeah.
But then, for it to be more accurate, wouldn't the pigs wouldn't they have had to have killed the chickens as opposed to the chickens rebelling and then dying through rebellion?
They killed a lot of the chickens and ducks and things, didn't they?
Mm. Yeah, they would be the closest, but I wasn't sure. I put them as a more general.
There's not a really strong animal, I think, for that.
Mm. Okay, so what do people think of Napoleon? Would you?
Pure opportunist.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, especially him in comparison to Snowball at the start, and their different methods of leadership, you could say, or how to win debates. Whereas Snowball is actually trying to sort of convey strong emotive ideas to people, which gets them on his side. Napoleon is working behind the scenes to create like mobs that will just like shout down anything, and also his own like personal military force.
Yeah.
So anyone, I'll just for anyone that's following along and isn't familiar with the story, although you should be, I'll just explain that after the initial fight back of the animals on the farm against the farmers, and after the death of Old Major, the two people that step forward as the primary leaders are Napoleon and Snowball. Napoleon, obviously, as you can see, being Stalin. And I'll just bring up Snowball quickly.
Trotsky, yeah.
Snowball being Trotsky, who, in my eyes, may be one of the worst human beings that have ever lived on planet Earth. That might be hyperbolic, but I don't think so.
I'm willing to believe it. What in particular are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, this gets onto part of the book. Part of their disagreement, they have a lot of disagreements. It's described as anything that one of them proposes, the other one will shoot down. But some of the main contentions that they have, reflective in reality, of course, is that Napoleon is more isolationist, or what would be seen as more of a nationalist. He wants to focus on just the defense of Animal Farm, whereas Snowball wants to send the pigeons to the other farms to encourage a worldwide revolution. So Britain,
he does so.
To begin with, anyway, there's at least fight back, but by the end of the book, we find out that none of the other farms have actually fully revolted and taken over. But so there's that point, and the other point is Napoleon is more of a Luddite. He doesn't want to focus on the technological innovation. He wants to just focus on getting them, encourage hard work, and use that as a way of use that as sort of justifying the regime, as you work hard and that makes you a good prole. Whereas Snowball, at least in theory, is trying to encourage technological innovation to get to this sort of communist utopia where no one has to work, because in this it's described as them doing a 3-day week, but if you're putting it into reality, the mindset of that side of the communist divide is that you get to this sort of technological utopia where no one has to do any work and everyone just sits about and everything's glorious.
That was Wilde's vision in The Soul of Man Under Socialism.
Yeah, and I think that's a really I
was
think
Marx's vision too, if you want to go back to it.
Yeah, because I've not read Marx directly, I obviously I can't speak to that. But The Soul of Man Under Socialism is a really interesting little essay, because he at least makes the point that none of this is achievable unless we get to this point. Now, obviously, we can disagree with him about there ever being that point where we have these Star Trek replicators, because we're still going to have
scarcity society.
Yeah, but obviously, as every good libertarian knows, the scarcity that you're always going to come up against is time. So you can never live in a post-scarcity world. So we can debate whether or not he's right in that ever coming about, but he does at least make the concession that the only way you're going to get this socialist utopia is if you have that period.
Wilde just likes the idea of everyone lolling about on divans, being waited
Well,
on.
he's this foppish Irishman that just wants everyone to be sat about feeding each other grapes and participating in orgies. That is him. Yeah. But he at least understands that he, at that point in time in history, could not achieve that. So maybe I'm being too generous on him, because I do find him entertaining. Yeah.
Well, Napoleon is the classic Machiavellian. He recognizes realpolitik and is unashamed to use it. He also doesn't feel constrained by any limitations imposed by ideology. He's a very practical realist, whereas Snowball seems to focus primarily on actual implementation of the egalitarian ideal for which he advocated. And one of the necessary preconditions.
The Dutch have invaded. So carry on. Hi.
No.
One of the necessary preconditions for that is the technological revolution and the windmill project. It's specifically so.
I've read the Communist Manifesto, but not thingamajig.
Das Kapital?
Yeah, Das Kapital.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but yeah. What about other people? Have they read the Communist Manifesto? No.
I haven't read any of Marx exhaustively.
I mean, it's short, so it's worth reading just for it to know,
Yeah, I've got no excuse not to. You have, but I have not yet. No.
I've heard from
reading list.
Joining us next week, we've got the Communist Manifesto.
Well, I've just heard a lot of people say that Marx is not necessary to read as long as you've read some of his followers or critics, because he's very his ideas have been very well dissected at this point.
Yeah.
Well, of course,
You're
the
going to
funniest
read
thing
it
is,
and then all of a sudden think, oh yeah, no,
I see where he's coming from now. Yeah, the funniest thing is that you say that he's not worth reading because of his followers. Some of his own followers say that. Slavoj Žižek says that he's never read Marx and doesn't advise other people to, if I remember correctly. And there was a couple of people in the Frankfurt school, I think it was Derrida, that also said, I've never even read any Marx. So
really,
apparently Marx was in a bar or something and was approached by two people and asked if he was a Marxist. They didn't recognize him.
Wait, this sounds like a joke.
And
two people walk into a bar.
And
Marx walks into a bar.
No. Apparently he said no because he hated Marxists. He basically couldn't stand Marxists, so he didn't identify as one himself. He found them intolerable or something because they're just, you know what they're like.
Tolerable.
But coming in late, I don't know if you guys already touched on Snowball, but the difference between Napoleon and Snowball is that Snowball promises improvement through technological improvements, which he might or not might. It actually works on the solution, while Napoleon just promises and it doesn't really matter as long as something gets done, which reinforces
that's what
his power position. Yeah.
Yeah, I put him down as being a technocrat. And
Who's the technocrat?
Snowball attempts to be.
Okay.
The other, I mean, we're going to bounce back and forth between Snowball and Napoleon because the divide between them ends up with them with Napoleon running Snowball off the farm, and he's then used as the hate figure throughout the rest of the book. So I think that comparing their leadership styles is going to be helpful. One of the things that I just wanted to bring up and see what people's opinions were. It's mentioned that Snowball unionizes a lot of the animals, but it literally does nothing, and it's like I wonder why it was included because it doesn't go anywhere. I just wanted to see what people thought of it.
Yeah.
Like he mentions that he unionizes the animals, but nothing comes about of it.
Immediately as well, they mention it. And it was interesting though. The one I thought was interesting was the cats union or something. The cat was doing the
voting on both sides.
Yeah, it's like basically re-education something, but it was supposed to be getting the wild animals to.
The cat was just one big opportunist, so he will always vote his own interest, and then I'll join this program so I can interact with wild animals, so I can eat them or do other stuff with them. So he is basically a opportunistic predator.
It's perfect. I
like that everybody learned how to read. Like everyone was literate, sort of. I mean, some animals could read one letter or something. They had full literacy.
Yeah, Boxer only had the first, was it 2 or 3 letters down? I think.
First 4, and then every time he learned E to
he forgot
H, he forgot A to D.
Yeah.
So just a couple of other points on them that I wanted to bring up. Did Napoleon destroy the windmill?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. They said they heard what sounded like a gunshot in the night, and I did wonder whether that was explosives. I mean, it could have just been the sound of it falling over, and I couldn't tell. I couldn't decide whether it was basically he was trying to tell us that Napoleon destroyed it in order to keep them, building a new one, or whether it was just the point about how he was inept and he couldn't design a proper windmill, so of course it fell over, just like all the humans predicted it would.
Yeah, it was either through stupidity.
Or malice,
or it was a way of just keeping them occupied.
I lean more toward the stupidity as a conclusion, especially the conclusion to which Orwell would have written it, given his understanding at the time, rather than maliciousness.
Wasn't it Snowball's fault, though? Really?
It's always his fault.
Another interesting little point on Snowball is that for ages it's speculated that he's with Frederick, which when we come to it, the divide between Frederick and Pilkington, the 2 other farms, or the 2 other owners of farms nearby. Frederick is Germany, and Pilkington is I think just the Anglosphere in general, or the USA in particular, potentially. It's speculated for a long time that he's with Frederick as a way of discrediting Frederick. But then they find out later on that he's been with Pilkington, and Pilkington has also paid for his retirement. And just that, I just wondered whether or not at the time that had actually happened, but the discovery that Trotsky was being put up in America by certain very rich people at the time. I just wondered whether or not that was public knowledge back then, because I don't think it is now. Everyone only thinks of him as dying in Mexico with the pickaxe to the back of the head, isn't it?
Yeah.
But,
when was that? Really... What year did he die?
His death? I'm not sure. The 50s?
Yeah.
Mid-50s?
It's 1940.
Was it 40? Much earlier than I thought.
Trotskyites are this weird contingent. I know I have a friend whose mother is a very fervent Trotskyite. His name is Lev. She named him after Trotsky. You can imagine.
Wow.
named after.
Wow.
I can
like-
certainly see
Didn't
Orwell
stand
making that illusion, but by the same token, I don't know that that's ever actually resolved explicitly in the book. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't. A lot of this is left up in the air intentionally. I think one of the biggest ones, which we'll come up to when we talk about Squealer, is the admittance of guilt of lots of the animals during the show trial. He doesn't ever explain why they're admitting they're guilty, because it's you can assume from the outside that they're not, and they're being coerced into admitting guilt, but it's never explicitly stated.
It reminded me a lot of The Crucible, where you have the girls who are just admitting to something because the rest of the group is doing it. It's like giving in to peer pressure. They were all in league with the devil, and it's the witch that made them do it.
Well, there's also the classic situation where you're going to have some true believers who actually feel guilty and actually did commit things.
Mhm.
So they confess just to sate their own consciousness, or their own conscience, rather.
Yeah.
But conversely, there's also the probability that this being Napoleon being a proxy for Stalin, there were quick whispers the night before between the dogs and some of these people, like, if you don't come forth and confess, we're going to kill your entire family.
Yes. Just to go back on the point of why I think Trotsky is one of the most evil people. This is one of the main reasons. Is Stalin was obviously not a particularly nice fellow. I wouldn't say I'm in favor of him, but you know who your enemy is. Whereas when you have subversives, there is something particularly evil about subversives, particularly with communism, that I just you never know where you are, and you never know. And it's obviously it's all done intentionally, but the infiltration of systems that the Trotskyites managed to pull off was, to me, more damaging than communism in Russia itself could ever have been. There's the old phrase that I think Bowden used quite frequently, where the Russian body was killed under communism, but the European soul was killed under liberalism. And I think that divide is sort of what I'm getting at when it comes to the subversive elements that came out of Trotsky and his ilk.
Wasn't Christopher Hitchens a Trotskyite?
Peter
Yeah,
Hitchens
he was.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
no,
sorry,
Peter.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens, I don't know what he classed himself as. He was obviously he was a
think-
socialist, but I don't know what he classed himself as.
I think he was. I think he, was one of these guys who was a Trotskyite and then got sort of, softened around the edges or whatever.
It makes sense because he went on to be neocon.
Yes.
So if he started off as a Trotskyite, that makes a lot of sense.
One of the core problems of societies like that is modern technology requires such specialization in function that in the absence of a high trust society, there's no possibility for trade, because one can't trust that the other party is actually providing you what they say that they're providing you, and you have no fundamental capacity. I have no fundamental capacity to determine whether or not my processor in my computer is doing what I think it's supposed to be doing. So the only reason I'm able to engage in trade with companies that produce computers is because there's an understanding and a trust established between us that they are providing the product they say they're providing, and they're not providing some secondary component to that product that undermines the relationship. That's why all of the tracking cookies and the metadata and all the rest of that stuff is such a big deal nowadays.
Yeah, it's like with all the 3G stuff, all the 5G stuff at the minute.
Right.
With China. Yeah.
We just don't have the capacity in modern society, with the modern breadth of the technological base, to actually live in a low trust society. We have to extend a certain minimum level of trust to our trading partners. And when that trust is breached, society as a cohesive unit with productive economic exchanges between its members breaks down.
It makes everything too expensive. So if you have a high trust society, you don't need to spend a lot on contracts or security guards or things that just cost money in order to do trade. If you have a low trust society, then you have to spend an enormous amount of resources in order to make sure that you're dealing, that you're getting what you ordered, or that you have actually fair deals. And since this cost is now almost, as you describe, infinite, it's so high because you need to have all these specialists in order just to understand the technology, or the technology is so complex that you need a whole team in order just to see what it's doing. It just means that we're at this point where we have a low trust society, and at the same time we can't pay the price for the things we need. So
yeah, well, it's like why a shop costs more to run. People complain that shops in like poor areas are more expensive, and it's because the cost of doing business in those poor areas is more expensive.
I suppose that's one of the greatest ironies as well, is that once you've gone through the Yuri Bezmenov laid out process of what's it called, demoralization, it's that very process that allows Trotskyites to infiltrate, or Trotskyists. I never remember which way around it is, but that it's the process of demoralization that allows them to get in, but it's also that process that it means that their system could never work because it's now such a low trust society.
I mean, do you think
it's one of many reasons it won't work? It's not just trust society, but it's a big one.
Do you think the world of Animal Farm at the end that Orwell kind of envisaged was akin to something like China is now? Is that considering it was written about Russia? Do you think that's where he thought Russia would get to? As in a country trading with other capitalist countries, while maintaining a dictatorship over its people.
I think Russia was already there in 1945. So under Stalin. So if I understand, I don't know if you guys already did, but if I understand correctly, the book just goes from, it starts out with idealism, like how can we build this perfect world, and then it moves on to like a communistic society where everybody works together, and it ends in a fascistic type of society where the state is everything. And you've seen this happening in the Soviet Union, where they went from the International, the song, to the hymn of the Soviets. So it became really centered on the USSR and no longer on the International Revolution. And you see the same thing happening in China.
Yeah.
Is anyone else?
There must be a word. Sorry, carry on.
Just by this picture of Trotsky, I feel like his eyes are bored, dreaming. Looking away.
There must be a word, because obviously from the communist side, a lot of the times they use the phrasing post-capitalist society. Is there a word for a post-communist society?
Yeah, fascistic.
Fascism.
It's close, but it's not exactly fascist. I mean, that's a rabbit hole that we could go down, but it's got a lot of similarities, but I wouldn't describe it purely as fascistic. This might
go
sound...
ahead and describe it however you want. That doesn't mean you're right.
Just true fascism has never been tried before.
Yeah.
Do you think one of the implications is that do you think Owen might have been suggesting that capitalism is what will corrupt communism?
No, I think that he's saying that capitalism. I think he's saying communism just isn't viable, and it's always going to default to.
But
I don't think he is, though. That's not what he's saying. That may be the actual message, but that's not his intent when he's writing this. He's describing the process of the perversion of the true communist process into fascism and the strongman and the oligarchy. He's condemning the fact that it's not actually implementing proper communism, socialism, and he's putting up Napoleon on a pedestal and saying this man and men like him are the ones that are responsible for this problem. And if we could just get rid of him and leave it all in the hands of Snowball, it would be perfect. Because if you read the book, Snowball is the hero. He doesn't do anything wrong. He is purely and totally 100% dedicated to the ideals of animalism, and he fights bravely in all of the engagements.
I think you're right that Snowball is the only leader character that actually cares about the well-being. So he actually is working on plans with the intent of improving people's life. While if you see that the windmill that has been produced in the end is not making the animals' lives better, it improves the economy. It makes the farm really efficient. But the humans that are visiting are impressed how little they feed the animals and how efficient they are.
That's what I found quite funny. That the main thing that impressed the humans is just how bad you can get away with treating animals, and they all want to do the same on their farm. Feed them the bare minimum and keep them the bare minimum of warmth and so on.
Yeah, it goes back to some of the dark humor in this book is fantastic. They're surveying the farm and saying, "Wow, we could get away with this. Why haven't we been implementing this all along?" He's a very good writer for that. Okay, let's go on to Squealer. Unless anyone has anything, I'm sure they're going to come up repeatedly throughout the discussion. But any other points on Snowball and
I just wanted to say that pig was quite a good match for Trotsky.
Yeah, I thought so. My search history is going to be littered with pictures of pigs, but I did spend more time than I should have looking for them. And this one in particular, I was quite pleased with. Squealer whispering evilly into the ear of a startled sheep.
2 legs better.
But yeah, he's one of the two ways that Napoleon communicates with the rest of the animals, isn't he? As the story goes on.
Yeah, so I understood him as being, just the propaganda arm of the state apparatus, but from digging around, it said that Molotov in particular was the inspiration for Squealer.
Really?
Yeah, which I didn't realize. I didn't think Molotov had that position, but apparently so. If I'm wrong, then just take it as him being just the propaganda arm.
Was Molotov a propagandist?
Yes, but I didn't think it was based on him.
His famous, cocktails.
And it was the Soviets' greatest barman. But the Squealer is somebody who knows how to twist, to rationalize any situation. So it doesn't matter how bad it is or what happened or how abhorrent. Squealer knows how to turn it, like saying, no, that card wasn't from the knacker, it was from the doctor and he didn't repaint it yet. So he can always give an explanation to a bad situation, and this always makes Napoleon look good, no matter what happened.
Well, he's a classic sophist, which is, basically just propaganda with a fancy word.
Yeah. Sophistry is not a fancy word, so. Yeah.
It is for the modern American.
But he is the one who creates the lie that seems plausible, and this helps Napoleon to cement his leadership status as a unquestionable leader, which is also reinforced by Boxer, who just says Napoleon is always right, because he doesn't have the capacity in order to show all the faults in these lies that are spun. Yeah, the animals know that there's something wrong because they know, like, oh, we didn't remember this rule like this, but then Squealer adds words to the rules in order to fit a new situation. So no animal shall drink alcohol gets changed into no animal shall drink any alcohol in excess.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't actually. Do you want to go into that, because we haven't actually mentioned that? That's one of the best. Again, one of the humorous elements caveats of the book. In particular, the death of Napoleon that turns out to be just a particularly bad hangover.
Oh, that's hilarious! I love that.
He bans it. He tries to ban drinking at first, doesn't he?
Yeah, because
with the death penalty.
No one will ever drink.
But you see that all the revolutionary ideals that are what's his name, the big pig in the beginning is the Lenin proxy,
Old Major.
Yeah, who actually has a different name, like Lenin himself and Stalin.
Yeah, I found that interesting because his name is Willingdon Beauty, and Willingdon is where it's set. It's a town in Sussex, I think. So I didn't know what that was in reference to. I knew that it must have been in there for a reason, but you're saying that it's because Lenin changed his name.
Yeah, Lenin and Stalin had their what do you call it? When somebody's not ruling their nom de plume or something like that, a fake name.
Nom de guerre.
Yeah, it's like when my
or
mom
nom de plume. Nom de plume is the name that one uses to write under. Nom de guerre is named one uses during a war.
Yeah, my mother named me Bishop or freelance, so I'm not doing that trick. But they need to protect their identity, and so they did that during the revolution. So they used different names, they used code names, and these stuck after the revolution. So that's why they're known as Lenin and Stalin, and they actually have different names.
Can't imagine living in a world where you have to use code names. How do you feel about it, Brandy?
I would never go around with people like that, Albion.
Stalin literally means man of steel, doesn't it? Steel
yes.
man.
Yeah, I knew Stalin changed his name, but I didn't know the same about Lenin. I should have assumed it, really.
I've only changed mine to fit in.
Lenin is obviously cloth man, or is that linen? I don't know.
Quack House is actually Duck House. He just wanted to feel like he was more plebeian.
but the only one with my real name.
But you see that the revolutionary ideals that are set up in the beginning get subverted one by one, until all of them are gone and replaced with a nonsense slogan that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, which if you think about it, doesn't mean anything. So, and if people accept that, you can make it to mean anything. You can justify anything by it. So, and that's one of the themes in the book, that these rules gets changed, because in the beginning they have rules, and you go, yeah, okay, they kind of make sense. The world for them would be better if they would follow these rules, these 7 commandments. But
I like when Squealer gets caught in the act on the final one, the alcohol one, I think. His ladder breaks, and they all rush out to see what's going on, and he's like lying on the floor stunned, and the dogs have to come in and rescue him.
Yeah. So I think another part about Squealer, one of the parts that I was shocked by, because it feels like a more modern convention than it obviously was, is the scientism used by Squealer. These constant reeling out of figures saying, well, you know, even though it may seem that life is worse now, we have 500% more grain, or we have, you know, X amount of percent of these improvements.
You just trust the scientists at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
With the milk, isn't it, and the apples?
That's because it's very hard to contradict somebody who uses that kind of language, because it's already very constructed that it looks very factual. And then if you start attacking it, then you have to either find some angle to show that it doesn't work like that, but that takes such an effort that for most of the animals or most of the plebeians in society, it's actually too hard, too much to do. So you can get away with a lot by using science as a front.
The great thing is, as well, I mean, I always see this on on talk radio and things like that, where they basically say, well, are you a scientist? You know, how dare you contradict these? You know, if you're not a doctor, you can't question these things that doctors have said.
And any contemporary example of anything in particular that you want to bring up on that?
Well, that goes back to the point about the trust societies and trust in societies. If the intelligentsia are abusing the trust of the general people by intentionally obscuring clear statistical evidence because it doesn't fit their narrative, and reclassifying things in line with exceptions being rules, then everything that is said is questioned. So you get to the point where 2 + 2 = 4 is being questioned seriously by some sections of society.
About it like this, it's not really...
If you redefine 2 and 4 or something else, then yeah.
Well, actually, in
I'm just shocked that you're so bigoted as to use numbers
know,
as they are a system of white supremacy.
I like the when they use like the example of rounding. 2.4 plus 2.4 is 5.8. Sorry, 4.8, which means that's actually 5. So they try. It's like, yeah, well, that's true in that one instance. But you can't.
But no, it's not. In that instance, it's 4.8. It's not 5.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like if you round the 2.4 down, it's 2, and if you round the 4.8 up, it's 5. It's just nonsense, obviously. But it's kind of it's got enough truth in it. We're like, well, yeah, I suppose maybe that's true, and then that's. I guess it's like probably.
I just want to go on record as saying that I am not against using the Arabic numeral system. Okay, so I'm clearly not an Islamophobe.
Disavow. Get off the stream. Can't have this kind of bigotry.
There's a line. There's a line that brings the managerial elite to mind specifically. Quote: "There was," Squealer explained, "endless work in the supervision and organization of the farm." Unquote.
Is that the part where it's immediately followed up with the explanation of that all the paperwork they do is immediately thrown into the fire?
Yeah.
I mean, I like how we're told to trust the experts, but it seems that that kind of stops when it comes to economics and maybe evolutionary biology.
Does it?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it applied in all fields. I thought that we were just meant to.
Oh no! If you were to listen to
listen.
the experts in economics, then we probably wouldn't be doing a few things.
Well,
like Paul Krugman. He's an expert of economics, apparently.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is now an economics.
Pick your experts.
Listen to our experts, not the experts.
Yeah. Well, that's
exactly.
Yeah.
Listen to the state endorsed experts.
Yeah,
we
the
like
official
these experts. Yeah.
10 out of 100 scientists agree or whatever.
10 out of 10 scientists agree.
8 out of 10 experts are real. 2 out of 10 experts make up statistics.
9 out of 10 dentists, and you never guess who gets the 10 dentist.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough of this. Let's move on to Boxer.
Wow, that is based Boxer.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good.
Boxer is a real Chad.
Yeah, Quackhouse's video is absolutely right.
That horse picture does not do Boxer justice at all. It should have been a Shire horse or something.
Yeah,
it's not as buff
be a big horse.
It has the white stripe, and I think that's the reason it came up.
So Boxer is the hardworking, not too well educated, not too smart everyman, who basically is idealistic. He believes in the state, and he believes in something greater, and he will work hard for that. And in the end, he's basically abused for that. So the prediction that Major makes in the beginning, that you Boxer, you will be sent to the necker the day that the moment your muscles fail you, actually comes true. And he's not sent by Mr. Jones, but by Napoleon and his ilk. So,
I just heard you say Major, and I had a flashback to Catch-22.
I forget the name of the first book.
He single-handedly carries the work of the farm, doesn't he, for quite some time?
Yeah. He's the most productive part of society. And
he's a patriot. I mean, in the truest classical sense of the word.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
He believes that working hard will lead to something better, but because he doesn't keep in check for who he's actually working, he's not effective, and in the end he pays a high price for that. So he believes that he will retire and that he will see the windmill being finished. That's the thing he wants to see, and actually doesn't see that because he gets sent off to the glue factory.
Well, he's an idealized form of the proletariat.
Yes.
Might be a contradiction in terms, but a proletariat Übermensch.
I wouldn't say that he's proletariat. That's different. That's significantly different.
But he is the part of the, what was it? From the strongest. I forget that slogan.
From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs.
Yes, and he has a lot of ability. And from any animal, he has the most ability in because it's also said that he alone is stronger than all the other animals combined. But he doesn't get any reward for that. He basically all his work gets destroyed, And basically, despite the fact that he puts in extra hours and works really hard, he gets he dreams of this pasture where he can spend his final few years, and he doesn't get that.
He's the embodiment of the Pareto principle.
Sad, actually.
See, this is a interesting distinction here, because you don't think he's the proletariat. You think he's more separated, a more superior section of the Russian workforce. See, I read it as Orwell hyping up the proles of Russia, and it being a more generalized work. I
can't see how Orwell meant that. I mean, okay, let me take a step back. I can see how Orwell meant that when he was writing it, but it does not come across whatsoever in the rest of the novel. There's entirely too many components, too many groups of animals within the farm who are contributing the best of their abilities. The chickens, the ducks, etc. The sheep.
But they don't all look like this.
I understand that, but that's not the proletariat. The proletariat is the general people, the overall masses of society. Those are the proles.
I think he's part of the proletariat, but he's not the whole proletariat. He's in any society you have, like, what was it? If you have any company, a certain size, the square root of the number of employees do half the work.
That's the Pareto principle.
Yeah, Pareto principle.
Yeah. So he indeed does like half of the work. He's that part, that very talented, capable part that does one thing very, very well, which can benefit society quite a lot if it is properly managed. But in this case, they built the windmill twice, and it gets destroyed twice, and he starts the third time, and it just shows that despite all his talent, it all goes to waste.
I see where you're coming from, and I agree that the difficulty here is where Benjamin fits into the picture, because the way I break it down in my head is that you have Boxer representing the idealized proles, and Benjamin being a representation of Russian tradition, and that's why they have this friendship. Whereas I don't know what do you think Benjamin represents?
I think Benjamin represents the proles.
I think
Boxer may. You were asking earlier about the Kolots. It's possible Boxer represents the Kolots.
Yeah, I was just wondering that, pondering that idea, especially with him. He does get knackered, and they make an attempt on his life at one point, but they just bounce off of him. Yeah, he doesn't even realize. He's not really aware. He's just like the dog jumps up at him, and he just pushes it down, looks up at Napoleon as if to say, should I kill this dog?
I feel like there's not enough demonization of him for him to be. Maybe you're right. It would make sense in some areas, but he is idolized after his death, and I don't know if that was. I don't think that was the case for the Kulaks.
There's a possibility Benjamin is just the older generations, but I do like the idea of him being tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I did get the impression that he was like, because he doesn't say how old he is, he just says that he gets very old, and he's always cryptic about it. But he kind of reminds me of this story about his grandmother in North Korea, who actually knows that this whole you have this that they revere the Kims as some kind of godlike entity in North Korea, and she knows that it's all fake. And sometimes she will say that, but usually she keeps her mouth shut because it will get them into trouble. But yeah, she saw the situation before, and she know that it's all just
pile of horse crap.
Yeah, and in the end, when a lot of people died, there are only a few of them who actually remember what the time was before the revolution, and they're all very old, and they don't remember stuff very well. And Benjamin is more or less a constant in this. You always have these older people who knew the olden days back when we were still under the Tsar and how things were, and but they kind of learn to shut up, because if they stir up trouble, they won't get very old.
Yeah, he's just a sort of ancient wisdom. He knows this is all rubbish, but
and tradition is probably a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's a one-on-one mapping. I definitely think both of them are not middle class, and certainly not members of the inner party. So that would put them into the common man.
Well,
Sorry, carry on.
Reactionary, weren't they? They were considered to be sort of reactionaries, like these peasants who, have traditional ways about them.
The ironic thing is that Boxer at any moment could have overthrown Napoleon, because if he wanted to, because he was strong enough that nobody could stop him, but he didn't, because he was so indoctrinated that he just said that Napoleon was always right.
And that's clearly why they wanted to take him down with the dogs when they had that opportunity. They underestimated the strength of Boxer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether in that part of the story, whether it made out like the dogs intentionally went for him because they'd been told, or whether they just got carried away with the moment and attacked him.
It seemed to me like he was a secondary target of possible opportunity. If it was planned, it was more like, if you can take him down.
So the issue that came about is that he questioned for the first time the narrative, because he said that when Squealer is giving another announcement about how traitorous Snowball is, he goes into detail about the Battle of the Cowshed, and he says, don't people remember that it was Snowball that was shouting long live humanity and fought on the human side? And then that's the first time that Boxer says, I don't remember it happening that way, even though I know that Snowball was a subversive and is an enemy after the Battle of the Cowshed. I don't remember it being that way. And so that's when it says Squealer looked at him suspiciously. And I think from that point on, because he has been completely unquestioning up until that point, his risk then overtook his value as being a strong member of the workforce, because if he can question once, he might do it again.
Well, he also it wasn't questioning so much as plainly stating facts that were in contradiction of what was coming out of the establishment. So there wasn't questioning involved. It was simply, no, that's wrong. And it was said in a way that was giving the administration and the ruling class the opportunity to correct themselves. It wasn't a challenge. It was a correction.
It wasn't wrong because Napoleon said it wasn't wrong. So that's why I was questioning.
It's one of the many themes that's like...
Oh, no, I understand. But the point I was making was that it was presented in a completely inoffensive way by Boxer.
Yeah. It wasn't even like a challenge to the authority. It was just, this is what happened from my memory. Yeah.
Which is what stating facts should be,
But the question, the thing was, when Squealer saw that, he recognized that there was the inkling and the possibility of correction. So an intelligent administrator would not push back on that, would accept the correction and use it as an opportunity to reinvigorize the relationship between Boxer and the administration. But the idiot Napoleon decided it was a demonstration of disloyalty, and therefore it must be purged. Of course,
I don't even know if it reached Napoleon. I think that might have been Squealer.
Well, there's a certain level of plausible deniability the administration uses with its apparatchiks, of course.
At that point, it probably wouldn't have mattered, because Squealer would just make sure that everybody stayed in line. There was no need to discuss that within.
Yeah.
Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?
Is that Rasputin or?
No. That's Thomas Becket.
Oh, sorry.
The troublesome priest.
And I think it was meddlesome priest instead of troublesome, but to get the quote accurate.
Actually, is the way it's usually translated.
But it's clear that any critique of the state is not tolerated in an absolute state, and that's also why this American what's the name, Beerhouse or something, he was arrested in North Korea because he took down some Banting, and did it for fun, not realizing that taking that down was for them the same as directly attacking the state, because any part of the state is valid. So if you just question the narrative, it's the same as attacking the leader.
Was it bunting that he took down, or posters?
I thought it was just a poster or something.
It was a poster or some decoration with a flag on it. It was something really, really, really trivial.
I think it was a poster, and I think he was trying to take it with him. I think he was trying to take it as a souvenir.
Yeah. So yeah, don't do that if you visit North Korea.
Don't visit North Korea.
Yeah, that's my position.
Alice goes to North Korea, doesn't he? He wrote it.
Okay. Anything else on Boxer? Have we properly covered his untimely death?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to, I think, one of the last characters that I've got a slide for.
The friend of the farmer, the church. So
the friend of whoever will have him.
Well, in Tsarist Russia, the Tsar and the church were very very close, of course. So
yeah.
So the Raven being the religious class who talks about, was it Sugar Candy Mountain, which is a something akin to heaven for animals.
Heaven, yeah. It sounds like Big Rock Candy Mountain, which is an old folk song.
Yeah, and he so he basically represented church, and during the revolution he goes away, but later he comes back because there's no reason to keep him away once the revolution is over.
Well, they also can't keep him away.
No.
That's one of those things that's recognized in the book, is that they wanted to kill him and get him away, but they couldn't. He just flew away every time they tried to attack him. He melted away.
Yeah.
And that's what the internal security, the cat, was trying to do.
Was Orwell an atheist?
He was, yeah. He was a humanist atheist.
Because I did wonder with Sugar Candy Mountain is a bit of a kind of insulting way to describe Christianity, basically.
Yeah, you can. I mean, from having read a few Christopher Hitchens books, I can see that he was influenced by Orwell in some of his writing styles, and I think some of the flippancies when he discusses religion, I can see a lot of parallels between the two of them.
To be honest, I don't think that Sugar Candy Mountain sounds that bad. I mean, clover is in season the whole year round,
and linseed grows on hedges.
Yeah.
So, yes. So there are worse propositions.
72 versions or linseed cake?
Take linseed cake.
Big Rock. It's like a retelling of an old, like a very old idea of the land of cocaine, where the streets are paved with pies, and you pick booze out of you drink booze out of the rivers, and it's very much like that, like the sort of workers paradise idea that goes back to medieval times at least.
Mm-hmm.
It's
so
basically
the
a land
animals
of plenty.
idea of the land of plenty and in excess, kind of, and you just loll about all day picking. But again, it's a bit like the sort of idea of what it's of the the plentiful, what we were saying about wild, and once we have machines, then we'll just loll about all day, and essentially that's what it'll be like.
Well, it's because once you take religion away and take heaven with it, then you quite often try and put heaven on earth. And I think that's where you get some of the similarities of this utopia that we can all lull about and drink from the river of beer that flows through the streets and eat pies all day. And what would have been previously seen as the afterlife is now what they're trying to force.
It's very materialist as well.
It's also what communists promise, right? It's like in the end everybody will be provided for, and and to be honest, I think that would be a very boring and frustrating world to live in.
Well, there's no meaning to anything, so what's the point? I mean, it's the classical conclusion of communism is nihilism. If you're in a post-scarcity society,
There's
leaving aside how we get there, but there's no point to anything. There's nothing that is needed, so there's no value in anything that's attained. There's no effort.
You already see that a bit in current day society, where people are struggling to find meaning because nothing is assigned to them. There's no intrinsic hill to overcome. There are some problems, but on average, it's not like there's a shortage of food or things like that. So people have to assign meaning to stuff, and they find this really hard.
It's also when all rewards are material, as was previously mentioned, as a very materialistic view of even. It sounds strange to say, but it's a materialistic view of the spiritual to have it being this sort of gluttonous fest.
All your appetites will be good.
Yeah.
Basically, you become the people on the spaceship in Wall-E, just being fat and lazy boys and just.
I'd say you become more like the pirates from Pirates of the Caribbean.
I'm sorry, what? What am I missing there?
The more drink that we drank, the less it slaked our thirst.
Oh, right, I'm with you. Okay, no, I'm with you now.
So eventually they got to the point where there was nothing they did brought any value or any joy, so they turned to destruction.
Well,
and it wasn't lethal destruction. It was just placid and inevitable destruction.
That went from making no sense to actually being a very fitting analogy.
Welcome to the world of understanding. Anyway, back to Fight Club.
Moving on.
We don't talk about that.
Oh yeah, sure.
I thought we were still doing Catch-22.
Never ending.
Aren't we?
Well, you decide from that picture.
You're all crazy.
Do you want to know why I put apples in my mouth? Let's move on. Anyway, I don't have a great deal to say about the dogs. Aside from obviously they're the representation of the military.
They're Napoleon's base of power. That's the mistake that Snowball makes, that he ignores the military and he goes in like, as long as I try to improve everything, people love me and I stay in power. But Napoleon already has taken the pups away and is indoctrinating them, so he's his private.
They're also like the children of the revolution military, aren't they? They're not your regular military.
Quite literally, because he takes the children away for re-education.
Yeah. They've known nothing else. That the state has always existed in their heads, and they have to protect it.
And that's the long-term project and the long-term planning we see with Napoleon and Stalin, is they build the systems and the structures for the next generation of power to use, with the goal and ideal that they're going to be the ones at the reins when they're mature enough to actually establish power. So the long-term planning and the Machiavellian manipulation of building one's own power base that can't be attacked from without, that is beholden solely to you, is a classic and core component of the rulership of a prince. That's one of the main points Machiavelli makes.
Indeed.
I just wanted an excuse to put some puppies on the slide. Yeah, no, you raised a very good point.
Those puppies are a little cuter than the dogs.
Yes.
Is it just me, or is the guy second from the left look like an actor in the picture on the right? Wash from Serenity.
It could be that this is still from a movie.
Yeah, he does a bit.
It's a
The
bit
guy on the left, he looks like he's the only one that looks like he actually might be soldiering.
Second in from the right looks a little bit like Christopher Walken.
Yeah, the guy with the red on his lapel.
This may, I think you're right. I think this is a still from a movie.
Yeah, rather than Soviet imagery like the one of Boxer. the socialist realism. There was an exhibition here in London in 2017 marking the Russian Revolution. And my little cousin, who's a teenager, went along to that. And then he came away a freaking communist and wearing he's so seduced by the posters and wearing a little, little medal on his jacket that he bought at Tate Modern.
I hope you slapped it out of him.
Propaganda.
I mean, the artwork I have always had a bit of a soft spot for.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Is that the Russian realism that we just had up for Box's picture? It's funny because it looks a little bit semi-inspired by the sort of artwork that you had coming out of Germany. That sort of pop.
But they call it socialist realism, which is like a kind of it's like a contradiction in terms because it's not realistic, right? It's just like what socialism should be.
But they were very effective at creating art, which was for propaganda. And you also have like a character in the book, one of these pigs that does it well, that makes really nice poems that inspire everybody. So it's for the regime, it's good to have artists producing art that glorifies them.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of. We've just got some minor characters coming up after this, but we've already mentioned the Frederick Pilkington divide. Mm-hmm. The bouncing back and forth of Napoleon between the two sides is obviously meant to represent Russia's tumultuous relationships with either side.
Yeah, I don't know very much about the machinations of Russia as geopolitical force.
During World War II, right? They were first allied to the Germans, and then they were allied to the Allies.
Yeah.
And then there's the component of Snowball being always, whichever one he's not working with, that's where Snowball is.
Yes.
And I think that process is reflected more strongly in 1984 than in Animal Farm.
So just noticed you haven't given Mr. Whymper his own picture. Yes,
you're correct. I didn't want to get
interesting.
Yeah. Do you want, why might I have done that? I didn't want to get taken down. All right. I don't know why he wasn't called Wimperstein.
What a joyous question.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we'll come on to him in a moment. The top one that we got on the list we spoke about previously is Benjamin. We've kind of had our discussion as to where we think he might fall. Clover, again, I feel is just the counterpart to what Boxer is. She's just the female. She's the more motherly female proletariat. There's not really anything else that I have to say on her.
I must compliment you on this headache-inducing font.
Yeah, well, I looked it up and I thought, oh, that looks fantastic. And then when I started using it too much, I thought, God, that's a bit. Well, just wait until you see the next slide where it's even more text. It's headache-inducing.
Maybe it's all right for like headline bits, but
I like to keep in theme. No one watches the videos for these things, do they? So,
don't tell them.
Anyway, Molly might be an interesting one to talk more about.
What was Molly?
So Molly is the mare, the thought that runs off to do with the humans. I think she's a representation of the bourgeois, of the petty bourgeois.
She would be something like an actress or somebody of nobility, somebody used to a better life.
That's what struck me. Like I was immediately thinking actress.
Yeah, it's this system isn't going to fulfill my material needs, so I'm getting out of it.
She doesn't benefit anymore from the system. While under the old system, she would get privileges.
Right, she has an opportunity to. Yes, exactly. She's smart enough and capable enough and can provide enough value outside of the animal farm to actually still get a good deal in the rest of the wider world. So she goes off and does so. And the times we see her again in the book, she's actually very happy for having done so.
The person
she ends up with someone who treats well, yeah.
The person who's reported to be the most stupid in the book is the one that gets out and carries on enjoying life. So,
which is pretty much par for the course in reality.
Mm-hmm. She's the one who likes ribbons.
Yes. No more ribbons in her mane. That was just unacceptable.
And no sugar.
Yes.
Of course, the pigs end up with the ribbons anyway, didn't they?
And the sugar.
And the sugar.
Yeah.
And the egg, and the milk, and the eggs, and the apples, and the oats, and the barley, and the alcohol, and the.
Well, this is another thing that might hint at a more reactionary spin on the book, is that it's quite clearly laid out that if we're putting it in the context of the Russian Revolution, despite however bad conditions were under the Tsar or under the farmer, they're still better than under a communist regime. So maybe his sympathies don't lie with any of the regime.
Again, I'm going to go circle back around to his point being that this is subversion of the situation. If we take a look at the only brief time and Snowball had power, life on the farm was significantly better for everyone involved.
But it had only just taken place. I'm not sure. I don't know. He doesn't challenge it in the book, but my takeaway is not that if Snowball was in charge, it would have been a utopia. I have the feeling that regardless of who was there, it would have been exactly the same.
I think you're being
too generous to Orwell.
Maybe I am.
I mean, but in a real revolutionary situation, I mean, for a while you live off the previous system. You know, there's still plenty from the
I liked the way that's depicted. You know, the first sort of time they farm and they have this amazing haul of all the grain. You know, but it's purely living off the fat of the previous establishment.
Well, that's the only way communism can survive.
I mean, look at Scotland; they're a prime example of that.
Or socialism, etc.
Yes, Scotland.
Well,
yeah, the net negative.
The entire point of socialism is to take the excess and redistribute it, which doesn't work if there isn't any excess.
Yes. No, I mean the bit with the ducks, and when it talks, when they admit to taking grain from the field that should have gone into the stores. It's very much like what happened in Hungary and other places.
Mm-hmm. And again, a couple of essays that I was reading from Excuse Me, Professor fit in quite nicely, because that book is fantastic for pointing out things that if you've read further or if you've dwelt in these circles for a while, you probably already know, but it's just a good refresher. But one of the ways that this view was laid out that I found a succinct way of putting it is that if you view the pie that you're sharing as being static, then you're already starting from a fundamental misunderstanding of what wealth is. If the pie is always growing in size, even if your proportional share is shrinking, you may still be better off. And I think that there's a very static view of wealth from most socialist economists, or any socialist really.
Who's in the few top percent aren't the same people who were in the few top percent 50 years ago, for instance.
Well, regardless of who's in the top 1%, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if that 1%. Is it better off to have a very small slice of a billion or a larger slice of a million. That's the kind of point that was being made. You shouldn't have this static view of wealth, because it's constantly fluctuating. So distribution is impossible to actually give a number. This is a bit of a tangent. I should probably move on to another topic. But
we can talk about economics for the next hour. I don't think anyone would particularly mind.
Moving on.
Terribly germane.
Let's move on to something less controversial. Mr. Whymper. Oh God, no.
Muriel. You skipped Muriel.
Yes. Yeah, Muriel's an interesting one. What do you think of Muriel?
Her name doesn't ring a bell in my mind, so you're gonna have to remind me what character.
Oh, so Muriel is the goat. So I take Muriel as being the people that had questions about the new regime, but never had the bravery to stand up against it.
She also had a bit of intelligence, like she could read.
That's what I mean. Like she's not an intellectual, but she had the capacity to at least think, to read and see the differences that were changing between the commandments, and wasn't able to actually articulate it. And I think it goes back to Orwell's constant focus on language control. She couldn't, none of them, neither Muriel or Clover, could actually fight against what was being done because of the language control that the pigs had over them.
Well, that does harken back to the classic question of, the classic axiom of separating the goats from the sheep. And the implication being the sheep are biddable and capable of being controlled relatively easily, whereas goats are stubborn and independent and individualist.
That's not the Christian take.
The only thing to which I'm hearkening back is an adage that I've heard from farmers and such.
Okay.
Oh, what do farmers know of goats?
Has Animal Farm taught you nothing? The farmers know nothing. Right. Let's move on then. Mr. Whymper. What do we think?
He's an honest solicitor who sees an opportunity.
He's a wealth creator.
Well, I'm not going to take issue with either of those characterizations. I would suggest that he's relatively amoral, but at the same time, he facilitates greater abundance for the farm in general.
And so, what do we think he represents?
Well, the international, monetary fund, the whole banking establishment.
Well, he's also represents the international traders who just trade without any morals. They just see an opportunity to make money, not to be righteous. Because if you're righteous, you would say, "Well, I'm not trading with this country," but there's always somebody who will. It's usually a matter of price.
He also enables the transaction, which turns out later to have been fake money.
Allegedly. So maybe it was real and Napoleon kept it for himself.
Yeah. It was never clear. It's because it seemed like, wasn't it Mr. Whymper who ran to them to tell them, to warn them or something that it had been fake. I can't remember how it came about that the money was fraudulent.
Yeah, he rushes in and then there's a kerfuffle in the farmhouse, isn't there?
Yeah, I get the distinct impression that Mr. Whymper is honest in his dealings. So the buyer beware, but the contract will be honored.
You get the feeling he's honest in his dealings.
That's a secondary interpretation. So that's not in the original book.
Well, it had to be done. Buyer beware. If you're going to sign up for the contract and you're going to accept the terms, then you're going to get the deal that was offered, and no more and no less than that, which strikes me as a rather fair. I'm not taking morality out of it and not assigning any empirical or intrinsic value to morals or moral compunctions about the dealings from a purely cost-benefit economic analysis, the contract is followed. That
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, but
anyway, it feels like a middleman, so that the farms don't really have to interact with each other directly, but he can facilitate that being a third party, which is something a solicitor typically would do. So if I don't want to directly talk to you, I'll talk through my solicitor. So, and I guess that with the Soviet Union, you had people who had that same role in order to make trade possible with countries that were like not supposed to be traded with because they were the enemy according to the revolution.
And those that worked with those people were generally viewed as tainted.
Yeah, but
watched very carefully by the KGB.
Yeah, but they were still one step away, one step further removed from the thing that was like publicly announced as the enemy. So it wouldn't pose like a problem because we're not directly trading with them. We're using an intermediate who actually prevents corruption from the the farms that haven't been liberated yet.
Right.
Something
no,
like
I'm
that.
talking about the people within the within the government who dealt with those people.
Of course.
Who dealt with the intermediaries. Even they were subject to rescission.
Yeah, or there was at least somebody who was like from the party, like when you call them from the Politburo, close dealing with it. So in every committee there would be somebody who was a party member or an inner party member. But that would have the same effect. Like there would be strict controls on those people. They would be watched.
Anything on Mrs. Jones? I have literally no notes on her, so I just put her in because she was a character there.
She kind of seems to be unaware of what is happening, and after the revolution, she needs to flee. So this looks like she's a bit like the Tsarina, who also was completely unaware what was happening in the
Princess
country.
Anastasia.
She was just one of the many.
Anastasia was the daughter of the Tsar, not the wife.
Yes, I'm making an exact parallel.
Okay.
That's one of the sadder stories, how that family died, how they lived prior to their executions.
Well, executions of families tend to be sad stories, yeah.
Yeah, by definition.
Yeah.
That is a sad story.
But yeah, she doesn't have a really big role except being the wife of the former ruler. She isn't mentioned that actually. They do mention Mr. Jones afterwards, that he died at some point and that he moved away, but they don't mention his wife.
Specifically, they mention him dying in a inebriate's house or something line like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that ever becomes general knowledge amongst for the wider animal farm. I think that's something that only the pigs know.
I don't think it's even mentioned directly by any of the characters. It's just narrated.
Yeah, I think by that stage it wouldn't matter either way. Who else we got? Oh, the sheep. Quite literal in his naming conventions here.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad. The amusing part was that they had to spend, what was it, an intensive week or a month or something retraining the sheep so that they said 4 legs good, 2 legs better, because they'd spent the entirety of the existence of Animal Farm training them to say 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and now the pigs were going to start walking on 2 legs. So
he's like a really annoying colleague that goes on a training course and comes back reciting all of the little one-liners that they've been given whilst away.
There is no I in team.
Yeah.
I always say there's no me in team, and watch the confusion.
So this one is maybe the most interesting on this list for how you could interpret them differently. What do you think the cat represents?
I think it's the opportunist.
Yeah, because there were a couple of places that listed it as being the secret service.
Police.
Yeah, but I don't see enough to support that.
Well, To be fair, the cat was basically viewed as someone taking advantage of the situation to try and meet their own ends, and who was fully capable of getting along on their own without the state. So they recognized that they were going to have better benefits by at least paying lip service to the state, and it was a mutually beneficial arrangement between them.
Yeah, I think that's closer to what I see the cat as being. Someone that saw an opportunity to take advantage of the system.
Well, more to the point that it's easier to work within the system and co-opt it to their benefit than it is to fight it. And either way, it's not really going to have a huge impact on them.
Mm. Okay. The hens we've spoken about already as to whether or not they're kulaks or more generally just industrial workers. Pigeons, I think, were just used only as aerial
Messengers.
And messengers. Yeah, I think they're just
They're a bit like
carriers.
It's like Radio Moscow.
Yeah. I mean, they're carrier pigeons essentially.
They transmit the message of the revolution, and they're also kind of the Air Force at some point.
And in most cases, it fell on deaf ears, except when they found animals that were similarly mistreated.
Yeah. And the ducklings are only mentioned at the very beginning, and they're just used as a way of demonstrating Clover's motherly instincts. So not really much to say about them. So if you thought the text was gaudy before, just you wait.
Oh my god.
Okay. So I will read it to save anyone having to go to Specsavers afterwards. The 7 commandments as listed to begin with are whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill another animal, and all animals are equal. Who remembers what gets changed and to what?
Well, I think all of them.
Not subscribing to the Daily Mirror, though.
So,
well, the
4,
5, and 6 get changed. I think 6 gets changed first.
Yes. So you have it changing from sleep in a bed to sleep in a bed with sheets as a way of them squirming out of being able to sleep in the farmer's house. No animal shall drink alcohol becomes to excess.
To excess.
And one of the best parts of the book, I think. And no animal shall kill another animal becomes they add on without cause. And obviously they use the justification of them having ties to Snowball as the cause.
Number 7 also gets changed in the end.
Yes. Well, in the end, that becomes the only remaining one of the list where they then change it to all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
And sharing out the rations too equally goes against the principles of animalism.
Yeah, well, exactly. You wouldn't want, that's too equal. You want it equal, but that's too much equality. Which obviously I'm completely in favour of, but it completely contradicts what they're saying. But again, it's part of the beauty of the writing of the text is these things don't make any sense, but you understand what's being conveyed. You understand the language games that are being played.
It's a great example of that kind of language and sort of historical revisionism and things like that.
Mm-hmm. It's gaslighting as well.
Memory.
I mean, gaslighting to me is kind of a new concept because the term, I highly doubt it was used that term specifically previously, but the idea and the implementation has obviously been around for a long time. And to see it used so effectively It's funny because I was sat there thinking, it's used incredibly well, and then I thought, well, is it being used any less effectively now? I don't think it is. I think it's just as effective now.
It's more refined.
The problem with this is their constant sophistry and redefinition of terms. That's what we're seeing with the shifting of language and the redefinition of words that have been used colloquially to mean one thing, but having that meaning, in some cases, inverted through technical justifications by intellectuals to mean the exact opposite of what it had previously.
You mean like super straight?
Well, I mean like equality. Fundamentally, equality has meant, at least in the Anglosphere, equality before the law, equality of standing, that the law is applied equally to everyone, rather than that the results of the application of the laws were equal.
Which to make the results equal, you have to make the application unequal.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm. And the funniest part about, as you say, the word equality is that the fight back that was had was that we will implement a new distinction, which will be equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, which, of course, even that can then get subverted in a way that means that there's no distinction. Because
I never had the opportunity because I've been oppressed for, yada, yada.
It entirely depends on your starting point. So that distinction, it's people using the letter of the law as opposed to the spirit of the law. That sort of framework where language games can be played because they can see a justification in getting away with it.
And that's the fundamental problem with the modern version of contract law in times almost prehistorical at this point. Contracts were only valid if there was a quote-unquote meeting of the minds between both parties adhering to the contract, which one of the core components of the meeting of the minds was both parties understood the limits and qualifications placed on the other party equally. So if someone, for example, wrote in a contract that there was a certain exception clause, both parties knew all of the opportunities that would lead to such exception clause taking effect, rather than one party hiding it from another party, that there was this new bill before Congress that would reinterpret that to mean something entirely different, that party A was unaware. Which has happened countless times in the past century.
Yes, exactly. And this kind of goes to what I was trying to talk about before, is that it's a combination of the system and the actors involved, because you can, if you believe that the Constitution was the best, is the most perfect piece of text ever written to base a government off of, if you have bad actors, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if you have bad actors acting in that, they will pick it apart and find ways of having verbal loopholes in throughout the text. Because if you don't have there's no moral understanding and a basic concept of what it truly means in not this semantics way, then that's how it slips into this language game.
I like particularly how when the sheep start chanting 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and then the birds take exception to it. I think it's
that's the beginnings of it.
Which one? What's the name of the character?
Squealer,
who then explains to them, well, you see, wings are basically legs for flying, so it still counts.
Yeah, from the get-go, they've said, well, we have wings. And he's, well, no, actually, we can make this fit the definition by just saying that...
Wings are a means of propulsion, while the hand is a means of manipulation, which is the man's biggest tool for oppressing animals.
Yes. Yeah. Which in and of itself is actually quite an eloquent way of getting around it.
Yeah, that's very adroit. It's an adroit observation, too.
Yeah, but it is the beginning of the downhill slide. So... Only a couple of bits I want to mention on this before we wrap up. The response to the book when it came out, there's a few interesting little parts because, as mentioned previously, he had a great difficulty in getting it published, and part of that was that no one wanted to dampen the relationship that they saw themselves building up with Russia. One of the people writing a review of the book at the time for the New Republic said that it seems to me that the failure of the book arises from the fact that the satire deals not with something the author has experienced, but rather with stereotyped ideas about a country which he probably doesn't know very well. Do you think that's a valid comment?
So what you're telling me is that journalists through the ages are reporting on stuff they don't know anything about? Like gaming journalists, or like?
Well, I can take it a step further. We can look at the differences in journalism because I've got a quote from The Guardian released on the year that the book was published. They said it was a delightfully humorous and causistic satire on the rule of the many by the few.
I think you mean caustic.
Caustic. It was just those last, the rule of the many by the few just jumped out at me, and I wonder if they would have phrased it that way, writing a review of it now.
You know, for the many, not the few. That kind of slogan.
Yeah, I just found it interesting that was mentioned.
Well, the reason I chuckle is Orwell's direct experience in the war. Is kind of tars the original critic with the fact that he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, because Orwell clearly experienced this firsthand when he saw what they were the ostensible goals of the revolution versus the conclusion and the result of the revolution.
Yeah, I don't see how you can make that, even if you don't like the book, I don't see how you can make that criticism against it. It makes no sense. I mean, anyone reading it must understand that he had quite an in-depth knowledge as to the structure of Stalinist regime.
And he's saying, well, you aren't Russian, so you're not allowed to.
Yeah, it's identity politics at its very beginnings. Yeah, I don't understand how you can make that comment. I wanted to include it to see. I'm glad I got a rise out of a couple of you. That for me wraps up everything I've got. Any final words or final comments that people want to make on it?
It's well worth the 2 hours or so it would take you to read it.
Indeed.
Yeah, I've read it several times. I listened to the audiobook as well, and I'm tempted to reread it just in my free time. So that is a real testament, considering that we're doing this regularly for the group. I now want to also read it in my spare time going forward. So
I'd also recommend this is required reading somewhere in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I read it when I was about 15, I think. I'm pretty sure it was assigned then.
I'd say even younger than that, honestly.
It has been on and off curriculums. I don't think they now include it. I didn't get taught it growing up.
Carefully removed that from British schooling.
Yeah, I'd say like 10 to 12 is probably a good time range for when this should be read, because it's short enough, it's simple enough, it's clear enough, and alludes to a lot of fundamental underlying truths.
And I suspect you could read it twice at different ages, so that you come back to it with more understanding when you get a bit older.
Yeah,
and if you read it to your child and they say, "Well, if only Snowball had remained on the farm, then you know to get the helicopter."
Yeah, start spinning it up.
We're going to teach. I think I teach it like an Aesop fable or something like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't really cover that much.
Yeah.
Right. So to wrap up, the next book that we're going to be covering is something that I'm completely unfamiliar with, The Day of the Triffids. From Recall, this was Quack House's Desert Island book. So it all rests on your shoulders.
I've seen the film.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of.
Yeah, I've seen a film.
I think they did a series. I think they did a recent series as well.
I have a vague recollection from when I was young that there was a series and I was too young to watch it. So,
I'm wholly unfamiliar with it.
Apparently, it's a book about botany.
Imagine plants with wheels underneath, and they're like.
It's like
And also
Audrey
women's
2 is.
I'm sorry, I can't imagine any of that.
I don't know, it's too sci-fi for me, I'm afraid. Right. So aside from the book that we have coming up in a couple of weeks' time, tomorrow we're going to be doing an essay stream on Notes on Nationalism, which obviously is an essay by George Orwell to tie it up together. And at some stage going forwards, it would be good to look at the preface. It might fall on one of the essay stream days, or it might just be an impromptu stream. But either way, I think it would be worth looking at. So I think that is everything, unless there are any closing thoughts.
You like better?
Animalism, not even once.
It was never truly tried.
Yes.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.